Hi, my name is Ariana and this is L'amour darling. So between Christmas and New Year's of last year, I was supposed to go to Washington DC to visit family, but with booming Omicron cases, it didn't entirely make sense to go anymore, so I stayed home. And I did the unthinkable, at least for me. I watched both seasons of Emily in Paris all within 1 week. With my mom, of course. Hi, Mom. And I must admit, it wasn't bad, and it was definitely a welcome distraction in many ways that Darren Star's shows can be. Now here's the thing. While the show was entertaining, the quality isn't good. And I think that most people can agree with that. A lot of this really comes down to the very racist and xenophobic stereotypes that are constantly used throughout this series in order to have a comedic effect. But it doesn't really do anything more than that. And it's clear that with this show, they're never trying to make a more profound statement by using these very tired ideas that just isn't Darren Star's forte. While these subjects are really important, that isn't what this video is about today, and I'm going to link down below some videos and some articles that go more in depth into these very terrible ideas that are rampant throughout both the first and second season of Emily in Paris. Instead, today, I want to focus on how American ideals are demonstrated abroad, specifically what it means to be glamorous. Emily in Paris examines a very interesting American ideal of what Paris is supposed to be. One that honestly doesn't represent France at all, or at a maximum, at a very superficial level. This is no better seen than in the style of the two lead female characters, Emily and Sylvie. Emily is of course the main character and Sylvie is her boss at Savoir, the company that they work for. Before I go any further, just general disclaimer, there will be spoilers for the rest of this video, so viewer discretion advised. Emily and Sylvie's clothing tell very different stories of what it means to be a local and a foreigner in Paris. One that, as an American expat here in Paris, I do not really relate to at all, either from Emily's point of view, which I'm the exact same, I'm an American expat, or even Sylvie's point of view, which, I mean, of course makes less sense that I would relate to. I'm not French. But it's still not something that you necessarily see every single day. Marilyn Fitoussi was the costume designer for the show, and Patricia Fields kind of acted as a costume consultant. Like many of Darren Star's shows, the focus isn't on realism. In an interview with Vanity Fair, Fitoussi explained what the production team wanted. No, we're doing a romantic comedy, so we don't care about reality. And that became rule number one. This dreamlike approach unfortunately didn't really work to their advantage. Our main character in the story is Emily. She's a Midwestern gal working in marketing, mostly for pharmaceuticals, who is transported to Paris to work in luxury, fashion, beauty, etc., etc. She's very much a fish out of water, and this is a story about a fish out of water. So, no surprise that she doesn't fit in. More pragmatically, Emily causes a lot of problems, many of which she doesn't solve in the end. She's arrogant and self-centered, yet everyone still likes her. Like one of Darren Star's most famous leading ladies, Emily Cooper shares a lot in common with Carrie Bradshaw of Sex and the City. One of these qualities is both of their loves for audacious luxury clothing. But while Carrie has become an absolute fashion icon, Emily is incapable of putting an outfit together. And this inability is kind of the perfect example of her narcissism and also the American vision of Parisian opulence. A perfect example of this is Emily's love for a certain French designer. In the first season, Emily wears a lot of Chanel in practically every single outfit. From tweed jackets, to earrings, to bags, to scarves. Well, very tacky and garish. Sorry, I'm not a fan of wearing logos from your ears. Chanel also represents the ultimate idea of French luxury fashion, even if Emily doesn't really even know what that is. Chanel is one of the most renowned fashion houses in the world. So of course Emily would think that in order for her to fit into the cool Parisian crowd, which all of her friends are apparently part of, so of course she thinks that she has to include it in all of her outfits. Because how else? Go big or go home, am I right? And yet this pursuit ends up having the opposite effect. Emily comes off as a complete peacock compared to her Parisian co-workers. She needs to be the center of attention, and she does this by wearing tacky and outlandish clothing. In contrast, Emily's boss, Sylvie, the ultimate example of class in this show, would never be caught dead in what Emily wears. She exudes class not in the labels that she wears, but the style, the fit, the quality of each piece that she's wearing. This harks back to a certain more modern American ideal that in order to be glamorous, one must flaunt their wealth through more obvious means, like logos on everything. The bigger, or in this case, more expensive, the better. I found this article from the Post and Courier that I thought kind of very much exemplifies the idea of bigness in the United States. And in the article they say that, as one German journalist summed up, to say that something is large, massive, gigantic is in America not a mere statement of fact, but the highest condemnation. So it's important to be the biggest, be the best. And Emily exemplifies that in exactly what she's wearing. Of course, designer brands are not the only way that Emily is showing off her tackiness, but also her bigness, quote unquote. She over-accessorizes in almost every outfit that she wears. She wears so much color and different patterns, it could give someone a headache. I think one of my favorite things about Emily's wardrobe in season 1 is that she wears a lot of Eiffel Tower iconography, just because she's now in Paris. But Trista Fields noted that Emily's choice to wear an Alice and Olivia Eiffel Tower top to her first day of work at Savoir was to represent her naivety on the one hand and her enthusiasm for this job opportunity on the other. But the Eiffel Tower is arguably one of the most distinctive architectural sites in Paris. It's pure cringe, as she decided to overload on touristy imagery in order to fit in by wearing a literal piece of a French culture on her chest. Or maybe even stand out, as the Eiffel Tower is one of the more attractive and distinctive parts of the Parisian skyline. Like, I really think that would be weird, but also really funny if she decided to wear a t-shirt with a Tourmont Parnasse on it or something. That would be iconic. But, of course, her Parisian co-workers are not tourists in their own city. They fucking live there. So, thankfully, most of her co-workers call her out on her ridiculous clothing choices, and so it's very much seen that we shouldn't think that Emily's style is somehow chic or even stylish, especially since nobody's ever even given her a compliment on any of the outfits she's worn in the TV show. It's of course also indicating that the way that she dresses, even if it has literal French things on it, isn't French, but really an American idea of what is French and what is Parisian. And yet, with everything that's off-putting about Emily's style, she's still very likable. And a lot of that has to do with the actress who plays her. As a person, Lily Collins seems like such a charming and nice person, and she quite literally looks like Audrey Hepburn. So there's a sophistication that she adds to the character that just would not exist if somebody else was playing Emily. The character herself, but also Lily Collins, are able to get away with wearing these just ridiculous costumes that a lot of the times don't make sense for the character, as she always looks chic regardless of if she actually looks chic. Furthermore, as this is a story about a fish out of water, Emily is literally a character that is plucked out of Chicago and ends up in Paris. So of course Americans are going to relate to her. This is kind of like Funny Face with Audrey Hepburn, where she's the dorky bookstore clerk in New York City who's picked by a handsome man, okay, Fred Astaire's not handsome, but you know what I mean, and taken to Paris to become a model. The audience wants to be her because her life is exciting. She's the perfect example of opulence that Americans want, with the big wardrobe to match. And maybe that's also what allows Emily's tackiness to also become a strength for her at work. Her marketing strategies are not at all in line with what a luxury brand is supposed to be, or what Savoir says that they are. And in fact, many times her strategies cheapen the brands. This is especially seen in season 1, but is still of course relevant to season 2 too. She and her work are constantly called ringard, or out of style and basic. A lot of this stems from Emily's Midwestern Americanness. She clashes with Paris, but Emily's tackiness, and thus Americanness, always win out in the end, even if it doesn't make sense. Sylvie, on the other hand, is what the French older woman is supposed to be like. Sexy, flirtatious, intelligent, and a bit cold. While definitely refreshing from an American perspective, where women basically could no longer work after they're 40 because they could never possibly be sexy anymore because they're not 25. It's also not that remarkable, as it's kind of the expected norm here. Older women in France also have to retain that certain je ne sais quoi chic that the younger women also have to retain too. In fact, they have to always appear younger, which of course means, for example, dyeing your hair, being thin, wearing sexy and revealing clothing. Of course, maybe not in the same way as you would when you're 18, but it's still almost expected. Marie Claire actually had a very interesting article about this. When you're a French woman, to age is to fail. I decided to stop dyeing my grey hair and had a meeting with a client who I hadn't seen in a year. He welcomed me with, "Oh la la, we're neglecting ourselves a bit, aren't we?" I was shocked. In France, you're almost start to be discriminated against when you're a woman over 45 years old. You lose your value, you feel invisible. So I think Sylvie kind of fits into this example perfectly, and therefore she fits into the same type of codes that Emily does, even though outwardly they look nothing alike and are nothing alike. Sylvie stands at the opposite of Emily. She's worldly, sophisticated, and everything that the American is not. She also has better style. I found her costumes to be the best of the show, primarily because you can actually expect to see a woman wearing them. She fits a dream as to what a French woman is supposed to be, in ways Emily could never dream of. Her clothing is figure-hugging and always suitable for work or night out. She, for the most part, doesn't wear logos or anything obviously expensive. She wears pencil skirts, low-cut dresses, and pantsuits. In season 1, she even wore a slit skirt that was both sexy and somehow work appropriate, at least for savoir standards. Sylvie is many people's favorite character and the sort of odd character out, and I think a lot of that has to do with her understated wardrobe. Sylvie's ethos is clearly less is more, the opposite of Emily's ostentatious and immature style. Her vision of luxury is not at all the same as Emily's, and yet the audience isn't meant to despise Sylvie either, even if she contradicts our starry-eyed heroine. She isn't bubbly and friendly like Emily is, but she also isn't a true villain. When, for example, she can no longer go on a trip with her lover Antoine because he has to take his wife instead, or she's almost fired from Savoir because of all of her kind of shady dealings, we are meant to feel bad for her, regardless of the puritanical and righteous lens that the show is under, because Emily also feels bad for her. In the same way as Emily, she can kind of have her cake and eat it too. So these two ideas of opulence, while clashing, aren't really fighting against each other either. They represent two cultures learning to coexist with quite a few trials along the way. And so with that said, I don't really even think that these ideas are even really supposed to authentically represent a French or American women or even the characters in any realistic way. They represent the supposed consumer tastes of each culture, one of a lot and one of less. It's disappointing, honestly, as the characters aren't allowed to really be themselves outside of what is deemed culturally correct. The fashion in Emily in Paris isn't representative of the real world, but something less realistic, something over the top and dreamlike. While dreams are fun and the show is pure eye candy, that's all it is, with no substance. And to be honest, it's not even really good eye candy. And that's exactly what the show is. An escape. An escape from the current political and social situations we've been living through these past few years. It's the perfect escapist dream of Parisian opulence during the pandemic for Americans. One that involves traveling and designer clothing, and there's no masks involved. At a time when many people couldn't even dream of doing this and are working long, strenuous hours. Because of this situation, the show's costumes represent something that I don't think the costume designers or the showrunners were intending. Clichés that feel especially outdated in this moment of what it means to be chic, to have style. Emily isn't the plucky heroine the show wants her to be, but instead an example of what not to be. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!